Hey, what's up guys? This is Vincent, and in this Lightroom Classic tutorial we're going to go over the vibrance and saturation sliders. They're pretty straightforward. They both impact saturation but in different ways. So again, I have this photo of Angkor Wat in front of me. The statue is inside one of the temples. So saturation, it's pretty understood globally in the photography world, and even amateurs can figure out what it does. So if I increase the saturation, it's going to add more color or more depth, or just make the image pop quite a bit. So if I overcook it with 100 here, you can see saturation has been added to the whole or entire image, especially this cloth here on the Buddhist temple. It does look a little bit overcooked at 100, but let's see the before and after. I will actually decrease or remove this left panel. I can also press F7 or function F7 as a shortcut, so you guys can see a better before and after photo. So with saturation cranked up to 100, you can see it equally impacted the image at the same rate. And since this piece of cloth was the most saturated part of the image, as well as this part looks actually overcooked, but the rest of the image looks pretty fine in terms of saturation. Now, if I move saturation to the left, it just makes the image pretty much black and white. It desaturates the photo and removes all the color of the photo. Now I'm just going to double click the saturation slider to reset it. Now, the difference between saturation and vibrance is saturation affects the entire image when it saturates the photo, whereas vibrance, it only impacts the areas of the photo that already lacks or is missing some saturation. So I'm going to increase the vibrance to 100 and take a look what happened here. The cloth on these Buddhist temples, the saturation was barely changed when I cranked it up to 100, whereas this blue area or blue tint on the wall, the saturation was severely increased. Now going back, let me reset vibrance, and going back to saturation, when I crank it up to 100, the blue only increased slightly. But once I double click this and increase the vibrance to 100, it severely impacted the saturation here. Of course, it impacted the saturation of the floor as well as the other sides of the wall, but it impacted this blue tint, or this blue, I don't know, it could be like algae or something, or some type of water stain. It impacted the vibrance of that the most. So let me show you a better example. Let me create a virtual copy, and we haven't gone over virtual copies yet. That'll be in a different video. I'll create another virtual copy, and let me do something here. So let me increase the vibrance to 100 on this photo, increase the saturation to 100 on this photo and the original photo. Oh, and by the way, I'll show you the example of what happens when I reduce vibrance. You can see it removed or made the image almost entirely black and white, except the area that was mostly saturated, which was this orange cloth on the Buddhist statues. Anyways, let me reset this. And by the way, just going to virtual copies, what it does is it makes like another image or file that's pointing to the original DNG file, but it's not actually making another copy. In other words, it's not taking up double or triple the size of the space by making virtual copies. And that's the advantage of virtual copies, to lay out different images and compare them without taking up extra space. Anyways, let me go to the survey view here, and let me compare these images here. So this is the original image. This is the image with the vibrance cranked up and saturation at 0. And this is the image with saturation cranked up and vibrance at 0. So you can see how vibrance and saturation impacts a photo differently. So when you have an image with a lot of color in it already, or it's very saturated, but there's a few areas that's dark or shaded, and you only want to impact the saturation of that area, then you would use the vibrance slider. So using these photos in combination, let me go back to the develop module. using these sliders in combination, you can get a perfect balance of saturation in a photo by using the vibrance and saturation sliders. So let me see what's a good saturation and vibrance here. That looks pretty good. Actually, vibrance on this photo is better when it's at 0. And just crank up the saturation a little bit to about 30. Let's see the before and after. Yeah, so that looks much better, and it's better to actually keep the vibrance at 0. Let's see what happens when we move the vibrance to 0 here, or to -100. And then increase the saturation to 100. So you slightly get that selective color look if you're into that, but there's better ways to do selective color, which we can go in a different video. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe, and follow me on Instagram. Have a good one, guys.